All right, here we go again. Where are we at? Joshua.
Are you driving Thursday?
Well, our quarterly jumps us all the way up, to chapter 6, with just a real brief run through on 2 through 5, but we need to go through a few things in there because it's important stuff, if you ask me. Chapter 2 in Joshua is the story of who?
Is this like a question of who's buried in Grant's?
Kind of.
Oh, okay. Let me guess here.
Rahab the harlot.
All right.
I think it's interesting that her poor lady is described as Rahab the harlot.
Uh-huh.
All Christians know her as Rahab the harlot. But what else do we know? What do we know about Rahab? What did she do? Why is she in the Bible? Why is there as many verses about Rahab the harlot as there is about conquering Jericho?
She's the key to their being able to infiltrate Jericho.
She hid the spies, the 2 spies. Isn't it interesting that he only sent 2 spies? I thought that was, to me, he was one of the 12. Only 2 came back with a positive report.
Oh,
So he said, I'm only going to send 2.
And we'll make it the same 2 as...
Right? So he sent 2 spies.
Okay.
Rahab the harlot hides them and protects them, right? Because if you look in chapter 2, down in verse 9, she says, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. Right? For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and to Og, who you utterly destroyed. And we have heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Rahab decided to hitch her kite with Jehovah. Right?
But who told her about him?
Well, the word about what the Israelites have been doing for 40 years had spread all through the
Oh,
land.
yeah.
Right?
That just by...
And they all knew about the ancestry, about Abraham, etc., Isaac and Jacob, and that this all land was all promised to them by God. And now God is bringing the Israelites out, and there's 2 million of them, right? And they're just like, man, we just don't have a chance. Okay?
On the social ladder, she's way down here. And why does someone that's at that rung on the social ladder, how did they really hear about this, and why did they really believe it?
Well,
all these others up here intelligent people didn't believe it.
Actually, the harlots were one of the gossip trails because she would talk to all of her different customers
coming in.
right? So she knew everything that was going on. Okay? Now, since she hid the spies, she was, and her family were protected. Right?
Okay.
And I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to do this in pieces, okay? If we go to chapter 6, right?
Okay.
Verse 22, Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, go into the harlot's house. Jeez, bless her heart. Right? And bring the woman and all she has out of there, as you have sworn to her. So the young men who were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all she had. They also brought out all her relatives and placed them outside the camp of Israel. Right? So she lived outside the camp.
What chapter are you in?
That chapter 6, verse 22, 23.
22. I thought that's what you said, but I didn't.
Now, but what else do we know about Rahab?
Well, she's listed in Hebrews
As a woman of faith. She's in the
hall
of faith.
Yeah.
In chapter 11 of Hebrews. What else do we know about her?
She's a harlot.
Yeah, because it says so every time I think.
Yeah. He's always called Rahab the harlot.
Ahab the Arab.
You know, I can say, bless her heart. I mean,
Yeah.
it just didn't seem quite fair to
Yeah.
stick her with that label, right? For, you know,
Maybe
because she
there was a lot
repented,
of-
and I'm guessing she was no longer a harlot, right?
Man.
At this point. But on the other hand, let's go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. We can just, in chapter 2, Abraham was born Isaac and then Jacob, right? And Judah and his brothers. Judah was born Perez. To Perez was born Hezron. To Hezron, Ram. To Ram was born Aminabad. To Aminabad was Nahshon. And to Nahshon was Salem. And to Salem was born Boaz
Ah.
by Rahab.
The harlot.
Rahab is the mother of Boaz.
Boaz, okay.
Who is Boaz? We're going to study Ruth here pretty soon, right?
His
Became
husband
husband of Ruth.
became, yeah.
All right.
What he said.
To Boaz was born Obed by Ruth, right? And Ruth was not an Israelite. She was a
Right.
Moabite, right?
Mhm.
Okay. And to Obed was born Jesse,
Okay,
and to Jesse was born David the
David.
king.
and through David.
And through
came the
David
Lord.
came the Lord God himself, Jesus the Messiah. So Rahab the harlot trusted God, and in God's grace, she is included in the lineage
Of Jesus,
of the Messiah.
yeah, name that son.
Something all the women in Israel wanted, you know, there
Oh,
was,
sure.
right, to be included in that. And it was Rahab the harlot who was included. So what an example of the grace of God. Reminds me a little bit of David and Bathsheba,
Bathsheba.
right? You know, he cheated with Bathsheba, then had her husband killed, and they had a son who died, right?
Yes,
Okay?
that was the price.
The baby died, right? But then they had another son. His name was Solomon.
And he talks in, I can't remember, I can't remember what psalm it is, but he talks about going to see his son again
Right.
in heaven. I think that's in one of the psalms.
Well, what he says was, he can't come to me, but I will go to him. Right. Okay. So anyway, we got that going on here where we learn about Rahab and the spies and whatnot back in chapter 2, right? In chapter 3, they crossed the Jordan. Did they all learn to swim real well? By the way, what time of year was it?
I don't know.
Springtime.
Springtime. We know that because in chapter 4, verse 19, the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month, right? And camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho.
Okay.
And what happens in the springtime?
Flood.
Floods.
Over the rain.
Right. So the Jordan is at its biggest point, right? And here they are ready to cross. Isn't it interesting? God brought them to the Jordan to cross at the time the water was the deepest and the widest. You know, at its flood stage.
He wanted to show off.
Yeah.
He wanted everybody to know it was him doing it, didn't
Yeah.
he? Right?
That Red Sea thing, well, this is gonna be a little Red Sea.
Pretty much. So what we find out here, right? In verse 7, he says in chapter 3, now the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. So his purpose for accomplishing this task this way was to establish Joshua in the eyes of all Israel and everybody else who hears the story that God is with him. Right? So, and what do they do? What do they do that's kind of different? They bring the ark.
Yeah,
The Ark of the Covenant, right?
Ark's gotta be in front.
Where's the Ark normally kept? If they're sitting still, where's the Ark?
Holy of Holies. In the
In the tabernacle. right? When they take the tabernacle down and they move, right? Now they've got the ark. Well, they've got the ark and they're there. So they're not setting up the tabernacle on the east side of the Jordan because they're fixing the cross. So what does God tell them to do down there in verse 13 and on?
Get in the water.
When the soles of your feet hit the water, what's going to happen?
It will part.
Yeah, he holds it back.
Yeah.
I wonder how high it stacked up.
Well, yeah, I mean,
2 million people had to cross.
yeah, that's no quick.
That's not going to happen in an hour, right? He held the water back. So I'm wondering, did it flood back behind there or what? Did it just stack up high? What did it? Did it just keep backing up
Yeah, that's an
all the way
interesting
to the Sea of Galilee?
Just stopped flowing maybe everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. All we know is that they went across on dry land. And then he had Joshua take one person from each tribe, and each got a stone, right? And they set up an altar with the 12 stones, right? Okay? So they crossed over on dry land. And by the way, it says in verse 15, for the Jordan overflows all its banks all the days of the harvest, right? So we know there was a whole bunch of water there at the time.
Oh, yeah.
In verse 17, the priest who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan while all Israel crossed on dry ground until all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan.
So it wasn't even muddy going across.
Nope.
Just
Dry
like it
ground,
wasn't
just
ready
like the
through
Red Sea.
Yeah, like the
They
Red
went
Sea.
across on dry ground, right? So it wasn't hard to do. And then they set up the altar in chapter 4, right? The memorial of the crossing. So, and this is one of those verses in verse 9 of chapter 4. It says, Joshua set up the 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan at the place where the feet of the priests who had crossed the ark of the covenant were standing, and they are there, quote, to this day. That's one, we were talking about that last week as to the timing and who wrote it and whatnot. Obviously written after the fact to this day. So whatever point in time it was writing, those stones were still there. Right? Okay? And by the way, what do we know about Jericho? They're fixing to conquer Jericho. What do we know about Jericho that's kind of unique? It is, if not the oldest, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. It's been there,
millennium.
yeah, thousands of years, right?
Damascus, I think, is older, but not by much.
Didn't they curse whoever rebuilt it?
Yep, that's coming up. No problem. That's exactly what happens.
You've already read the book.
Somebody actually read this stuff, huh? Jack does, but he don't share with nobody.
I'm gonna have to sit up a coffee pot.
Okay, man. Yeah. So the stones are all set up at Gilgal, which is where they established, their camp, right? Right? And in chapter 4, last verse, verse 24, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. God does amazing, amazing things, right? And, we who study it and this, he did this, we just kind of take it for granted. We don't stop and think about what a big deal it was at the time.
Yeah.
Can you imagine all the people in Jericho knowing they're coming, and now they're crossing the river on dry land like they did at the Red Sea?
Yeah. I get out of here.
Their hearts are just crushed, right?
Oh, yeah.
We're dead.
Yeah.
We're dead. It's that simple. We're dead. Right? Now, why is Rahab saved?
Because she helped the spies.
And she helped the spies because
She knew it was their land. She had believed what
Yeah,
it
she
was.
believed.
she believed God.
God, yeah,
She repented.
yeah.
Couldn't some of the others have repented? Couldn't they have said, the Lord God of Israel is God? Based on everything I've seen and heard and whatnot, couldn't they have repented?
They seem to be a little stubborn about that.
Yeah.
I can't.
People, you know, the most obvious things are avoided by people who want to do their own thing, no matter
Oh,
what.
yeah.
Isn't that true still today?
That, oh,
Why do people
it
not
might
accept?
be worse today.
Yeah, why do people not accept Jesus Christ after what he's done for them?
Because it means giving up themselves in
Yeah.
order to follow him, so.
Yeah,
Pride.
yeah, it's the biggest,
Thank you.
Yeah, you know.
everything starts with that. That's
Isn't it
why.
just amazing, though, how people act? We studied in Peter, you know, all the things that God has done for us and how we should act, right? We should be out witnessing and whatnot. Of course, you know, remember, the results of our witnessing are not up to us. That's between them and God, right? And if they want to be stubborn, if they want to be prideful, and they want to decide to go to hell, God's going to let them go.
Yeah. The last thing he would do is make them go to heaven, which, if you didn't believe in him, and they sent you to heaven, well, that would be your hell.
Now, down in chapter 5, we have some interesting things. First off, all of the men born in the wilderness over the 40 years had never been circumcised. So they stopped and circumcised everybody as soon as they got across the Jordan.
I got a surprise for you.
I'm gonna be at the back of the line.
I'd have been at the front. If you got to do it, get
Just
it done,
get it
get it
over
over with. Who wants to sit there and think about it for days? Right? You know?
Yeah,
Anyway,
snitch
so they
in.
did that. So what does that demonstrate, though?
Where does it say that? I missed it.
Chapter 5, verse
5.
2 to 9.
Oh, make flint knives or?
Mm-hmm.
What does that demonstrate? The people's obedience and
God.
commitment to God,
To God.
right? This generation is the only generation that fully followed Jehovah. The only one.
I mean, that's-
Their children didn't. They started sliding, right? And they were back and forth after that, you know. And they never came back like this generation.
Yeah.
This generation, some of them came out of Egypt, but they were younger than 20 when they did. The rest of them were born in the wilderness. Because everybody over 20 outside of Joshua and Caleb,
Yeah,
right,
'cause-
died.
yeah, died.
They didn't come into the promised land. Just Joshua and Caleb, the only two. Maybe some of the women, but you know, nobody counted women back then.
I was gonna say, who counts them?
Right? So anyway, now something else interesting. What time of the year is it? When did they cross over?
Springtime.
The first month, the 10th day. What happens on the 14th day?
That'd be
Passover,
Passover, 14th of Tishri.
right? So here we are now, we have Passover on the 14th day of the month, verse 10 of chapter 5. And what have they been eating in the desert all through their time wandering through there?
Quail and manna.
Manna. Well, in verse 12, we find out that now they got food. They're in the promised land. The manna stopped.
Yeah.
It continued every day except for the Sabbath, right?
Got a double portion.
On the day before,
Yeah.
right? And then now that they're in the promised land and they have produce to eat, that must have probably tasted pretty good after all those years of eating. I mean, manna was probably pretty good, but nonetheless, the same thing every day for, for
40
years and years and years, right? They got to that stuff. They're like, man, this is good stuff, right? Anyway, then somebody visits Joshua, who is known as, verse 14, captain of the host of the Lord.
Ooh, I like that title.
Captain of the host of the Lord. Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, "What has my Lord to say to his servant?" And the captain of the Lord's host said to Joshua, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." What made it holy?
Presence of God.
So who was actually there, the captain of the Lord's host? Verse 2 of chapter 6. And the Lord said to
okay,
Joshua,
So it's Jesus, the great
Jesus.
I am.
Jesus, the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ himself again. That's
Yeah.
my opinion.
Oh, mine too.
Since it says this is the Lord,
Yeah.
right?
And if he's the Lord of hosts, that's Jesus. That's one of his titles.
And so now it's time to take Jericho, and what's the battle plan?
Oh, we're gonna do some heavy duty walking. And blowing trumpets and stuff.
Marching. Marching. What happens when people march?
Instead,
In step.
Instead, what happens on bridges?
Why do troops not march across bridges?
Yeah, because
They'll fall down.
they'll fall down. Yeah, you can literally do that.
Right. So they're marching. It tells us every time that it's described that they're to march. Now they're to march around Jericho one time each day for 6 days. Right? March around Jericho. And how many of them are marching?
2 million.
Well, we know that the 2.5 tribes from the eastern side supplied 40,000, if we go back to chapter 4, verse 13, 40,000 soldiers equipped for war. So how many total soldiers were there out of 12 tribes? 2.5 is 40,000, right? Certainly north of 100,000 soldiers, right? Ready for war, marching around. Now, Jericho's a walled city, but it's not like Oklahoma City, right?
Oh, no, it's not.
I mean, you could be away from the wall where the archers couldn't reach you, and it would still only be a mile around the whole thing. Well, how wide abreast do they have to be to get 100,000 soldiers plus? Maybe 200,000, maybe 300,000,
Yeah, who knows?
because those weren't the biggest tribes,
Yeah.
right? Around. I don't know, were they 12 abreast or what were they,
Yeah, I don't
right?
know.
Because they, by the time the last group gets out of the starting gate, the first group is coming in.
Coming in,
So you
yeah.
gotta have them wide enough to get that many to go around, right? And where is the ark during the march?
In the front. Uh-uh.
In the middle,
In the middle.
in the middle.
I don't know why you did that.
Where is God? In the midst of
In
the
the midst.
Israelites. And he's in the middle, right? The ark is in the
Okay.
middle. And what's on top of the ark?
Well, it has a cherubim.
Yeah,
one on each end.
pointing to what?
What?
What-
To the mercy seat.
And what's right above the mercy seat?
Well, that's where God.
The presence of God Almighty, right? It's supposed to be there,
will be
right?
there, right.
So the presence of God is in the middle of Israel, the Israelites, as
I
they
see
march
that.
around Jericho. Okay?
Okay.
The ark was not normally something you would take into battle. Right? It belongs in the tabernacle,
Yeah,
right?
right.
But in this case, it's in the midst. And everybody in Jericho looking out from the wall can see. Right? This mass of people, and they're marching. What do you think it felt like in Jericho when they're marching
Oh,
around?
my word.
I'm just guessing,
I
right?
mean, it would sound like just thousands
like
of
thunder?
horses.
Like
almost,
thunder?
Like thunder, or,
Right? How many
Feel it.
yeah.
priests were carrying the ark?
7.
7. Right? And
Yeah, they can.
how many ram's horns did they have?
7.
7. And how many times did they how many days did they march around?
7.
And how many times on the 7th day?
7.
That number just keeps coming up,
Well,
right? And what does 7 actually mean?
it's
The completeness.
completeness, yeah.
This is the total story,
It's
right?
all you need is
So they
7.
march around 7 times, and what happens? On the 7th time, they march around, they blow the horns, and then what?
Shout.
For the first time, they shouted. They never shouted the other 6 days or the first 6 times on the 7th day. The last time, then they shouted, and then what happened?
Walls fell
Came
in.
down.
The walls came tumbling down.
How did they come down?
How did they? Well,
Yeah,
it'd
what-
be
Yeah,
through God. I mean, he's gonna supply that side of it. They supplied the commitment. They would be deemed righteous.
Now, I don't know, I haven't found this, I was looking for this yesterday, and I didn't find it. But I heard a guy one time say that the walls of Jericho didn't fall down like this, that they fell down like this. Either way, they're gone,
Yeah, yeah, they're gone.
right? And then what did God tell them to do? March straight in.
Yeah,
They're,
didn't
they've,
it kinda like provide a ramp for them to march straight in, or am I thinking of another story?
we don't know exactly how it fell, but
But
you know, if it,
Yeah.
even if it fell down this way, now they just step up on it,
Yeah.
right? And just march in. So they're completely surrounded Jericho, and now this 200, 300, however many thousand soldiers just come straight in from all sides. And
Yeah,
of course,
they
the
know for
people in the
sure
middle,
they
that
know for
already
sure
didn't have any
that
spirit to fight,
that it didn't fall outward.
you know. It was down,
It went down.
right? And they went and got Rahab, right? From her room. Where was her room?
I thought it was close to the road.
On the wall.
On the
Yeah.
way,
So that piece of wall didn't fall. Unless it slid down like we're talking about.
Yeah.
Now her house is just on the
It's
ground.
ground.
You know, I don't know. But bottom line, she was protected, right?
Yes.
Not only by the Israelites when they came in and chopped everybody up, because who did they kill?
Everyone.
Everyone.
Everybody. Men,
Women,
women,
children,
children,
probably all the
goats,
animals.
sheeps, you name it, everything was killed. And everything of any value, gold, silver, etc., was all taken to the Lord's treasury for whatever God wanted to do with it, right? Because this was God's win,
Oh, yeah.
right? God won the battle of Jericho. And that's what the whole point was, right? They wanted to get across. The people did exactly as the Lord commanded. As silly as it may have sounded, right? If you're a soldier, you're like, well, let's go fight. And then, no, march.
Nah, we're just gonna march.
Just march around, blow the horn, and shout at them.
Boy, don't you know some of those people go, what?
Right?
Okay.
You know, that all the gold and the silver and everything was set apart for God, right? Probably went to the priest who did with it whatever, you know, they may have melted it down and done something, made other things with it. I don't know what they did with it, right? You know, but they did everything as God commanded. And now the spies had told Rahab to hang the scarlet rope outside her window.
Okay.
If the wall came down,
Yeah.
you know, there's no mention of the scarlet rope at this point, but they knew where to go, right? And she was protected, you know. And like I said earlier, because she had repented, she was saved. But you can't say that for the rest of Jericho, because everybody else outside of her family were killed, right? All right. It says that she lived in the midst of Israel to this day. So whenever this writing was, right?
Rahab was alive.
Yeah. And then we know, as we talked about earlier, what happened. And then it says in verse 26, right? Cursed before the Lord is the man who rises up and builds the city Jericho. Right? With the loss of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation,
Cool.
and with, right? And with the loss of his youngest son shall he set up its gates. So if you want to build Jericho, go right ahead, boy, it's going to cost you.
Very good.
I don't think I want to be cursed by the Lord. And the last thing we have here in verse 27, so the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. Everybody thought Jericho was impenetrable, right?
yeah.
Because they had a natural spring. So they had water, you know.
Yeah.
Nope, everybody, you can't take Jericho. Well, they took it in one day. After 7 days of marching.
Big fire shot.
7 days.
Yeah. They just had to do some marching ahead of time.
I mean, what do you think those people inside looking out would think? These
I
people
believe if I would live
are
there
nuts.
during those 7 days, I think after we got through marching that day, I got out of there.
But they were completely surrounded.
Yeah.
at that point. If you didn't get out of there beforehand, right, you were killed that day.
Yeah,
Except for Rahab and her family and, you know, brothers and sisters and whatnot.
it's an interesting
Right.
place to see.
Well, that's the story of Jericho. Now Joshua, now it says, not only did God win the battle of Jericho, he established Joshua as the leader, right? Like Moses. So the people completely trusted Joshua like they did Moses. And now they're fixing to take on the rest of the promised land. They've got a lot of battles ahead
Yeah.
of them. It doesn't tell us, but it seems to imply to me that none of the Israelites were killed during the battle.
They may not have been.
You know, their sandals didn't wear out in their 40 years in the desert.
Their
Their clothes
didn't
never
wear
wore out. It's kind of like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They go
Yeah.
into the fire and they come out and they don't even smell like smoke.
Well, and even during the time of the plagues, the 10 plagues, since the majority, well, in fact, could have been all of them lived up in Goshen. You know, that's
The
where
Israelites lived in Goshen, right?
and they were not, I'd heard or read someplace, they were not affected by any of the plagues either that came on Pharaoh.
There were some that they were, most that they were not, right? And of course, the last plague, the big one, when the death angel came,
Yeah.
because of the blood,
Because of the blood.
right, of Jesus Christ, I
Yeah.
might add, right? They were not killed.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions or comments?